Indonesia, officially the Republic of Indonesia, is a sovereign island country in Southeast Asia and Oceania. Indonesia is the largest island country in the world by the number of islands, with more than 14,000 islands. Indonesia has an estimated population of over 255 million people, and is the world's fourth most populous country and the most populous Muslim-majority country. The world's most populous island of Java contains 51% of the country's population. Indonesia's republican form of government includes an elected legislature and president. Indonesia has 34 provinces, of which 5 have special administrative status. The nation's capital city is Jakarta. The country shares land borders with Papua New Guinea, East Timor, and Malaysia. Other neighboring countries include Singapore, the Philippines, Australia, Palau, and the Indian Territory of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Indonesia is a founding member of ASEAN and a member of the G20 major economies. The Indonesian economy is the world's 16th largest by nominal GDP and the 8th largest by GDP at PPP. The Indonesian archipelago has been an important trade region since at least the 7th century, when Srivijaya and then later Majapahit traded with China and India. Local rulers gradually absorbed foreign cultural, religious and political models from the early centuries CE, and Hindu and Buddhist kingdoms flourished. Indonesian history has been influenced by foreign powers drawn to its natural resources. Muslim traders and Sufi scholars brought the now dominant Islam, while European powers brought Christianity and fought one another to monopolize trade in the Spice Islands of Maluku during the Age of Discovery. Following 3.5 centuries of Dutch colonialism starting from the East Indonesia of West Papua, Timor to eventually all of West Indonesia, at times interrupted by Portuguese, French and British rule, Indonesia secured its independence after World War II. Indonesia's history has since been turbulent, with challenges posed by natural disasters, mass slaughter, corruption, separatism, a democratization process, and periods of rapid economic change. Indonesia consists of hundreds of distinct native ethnic and linguistic groups. The largest, and politically dominant, ethnic group are the Javanese. A shared identity has developed, defined by a national language, ethnic diversity, religious pluralism within a majority Muslim population, and a history of colonialism and rebellion against it. Indonesia's national motto, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, articulates the diversity that shapes the country. Despite its large population and densely populated regions, Indonesia has vast areas of wilderness that support the world's second highest level of biodiversity. The country has abundant natural resources, yet poverty remains widespread. Etymology. The name Indonesia derives from the Greek words Indos and Nessos, meaning Indian island. The name dates to the 18th century, far predating the formation of independent Indonesia. In 1850, George Windsor Earl, an English ethnologist, proposed the terms Indonesians, and, his preference, Malaysians, for the inhabitants of the Indian archipelago or Malayan archipelago. In the same publication, a student of Earl's, James Richardson Logan, used Indonesia as a synonym for Indian archipelago. However, Dutch academics writing in East Indies publications were reluctant to use Indonesia. Instead, they used the terms Malay Archipelago, the Netherlands East Indies, popularly Indi, the East, and Insulinda. After 1900, the name Indonesia became more common in academic circles outside the Netherlands, and Indonesian nationalist groups adopted it for political expression. Adolf Bastian, of the University of Berlin, popularized the name through his book Indonesian Ode die Insel des Malaysian Archipels, 1884–1894. The first Indonesian scholar to use the name was Suwadi Suyaningrat, when he established a press bureau in the Netherlands with the name Indonesische Persbureau in 1913. History. Prehistorical era fossils and the remains of tools show that the Indonesian archipelago was inhabited by Homo erectus, popularly known as Java man, between 1.5 million years ago and as recently as 35,000 years ago. Homo sapiens reached the region by around 45,000 years ago. In 2011, evidence was uncovered in neighboring East Timor showing that 42,000 years ago these early settlers were catching and consuming large numbers of big, deep-sea fish such as tuna, and that they had the technology needed to make ocean crossings to reach Australia and other islands. Austronesian peoples, who form the majority of the modern population, migrated to Southeast Asia from Taiwan. They arrived in Indonesia around 2000 BCE, and as they spread through the archipelago, pushed the indigenous Melanesian peoples to the Far Eastern regions. Ideal agricultural conditions, and the mastering of wet field rice cultivation as early as the 8th century BCE, allowed villages, towns, and small kingdoms to flourish by the 1st century CE. Indonesia's strategic sea lane position fostered inter-island and international trade, including links with Indian kingdoms and China, which were established several centuries BCE. Trade has since fundamentally shaped Indonesian history. In the mid-1st millennium AD, Indonesian trader ships to Madagascar as well as eastern coast of Africa. Hindu and Buddhist kingdoms era Hinduism and Mahayana Buddhism arrived in Indonesia in the 4th and 5th century. As trade with India intensified under the southern Indian Pallava dynasty, this is evidenced in the Kutai, Tarumanagara, and Kantoli kingdoms of the period. From the 7th century to early 11th, the powerful Srivijaya naval kingdom became a hegemon in Southeast Asia and flourished as a result of trade and the influences of Hinduism in Buddhism that were imported with it. Srivijaya's main foreign interest was nurturing lucrative trade agreements with China which continued from the Tang dynasty to the Song dynasty. Srivijaya had religious, cultural and trade links with the Buddhist Pala Empire of Bengal, as well as with the Islamic Caliphate in the Middle East. The necessity to maintain its trade monopoly had led the empire to launch naval military expeditions against rival ports in Southeast Asia and to absorb them into Srivijaya's sphere of influence. The port of Malaysia in Jambi, Kota Kapur in Bangka Island, Tarumanagara and the port of Sunda in West Java, Kalinga in Central Java, the port of Kadaranchaya in Malay Peninsula are among the regional ports that were absorbed within Srivijayan's sphere of influence. A series of Javan Srivijaya raids on the ports of Kampar in Cambodia was also part of its effort to maintain its monopoly in the region by sacking its rival ports. After the invasion by Rajendra Chola I, the king of the Chola dynasty from Coromandel, authority of Srivijaya over the islands of Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula weakened. Sometime later came a new dynasty that took over the role of Sailendra dynasty, called by the name of Morley Dynasty. Morley dynasty of Malay kings that rules Dharmasraya kingdom, centered in Batanghari river system. In later period of the kingdom's capital shifted inland upstream of Batanghari to Dharmasraya and later moved further inland to Pagaruyung. Between the 8th and 10th centuries, the agricultural Buddhist Sailendra and Hindu Mataram dynasties thrived and declined in inland Java, leaving grand religious monuments such as Sailendra's Borobudur and Mataram's Prambanan. The Hindu Majapahit kingdom was founded in eastern Java in the late 13th century, and under Gajah Mada, its influence stretched over much of Indonesia. The founder of the Majapahit, Kertarajasa, was the son-in-law of the ruler of the Singhasari kingdom, also based in Java, after Singhasari drove Srivijaya out of Java in 1290. The rising power of Singhasari came to the attention of Kublai Khan in China and he sent emissaries demanding tribute. Kertanegara, ruler of the Singhasari kingdom, refused to pay tribute, and the Khan sent a punitive expedition which arrived off the coast of Java in 1293. By that time, a rebel from Kediri, Jayakatwang, had killed Kertanegara. The Majapahit founder allied himself with the Mongols against Jayakatwang, and once the Singhasari kingdom was destroyed, turned and forced his Mongol allies to withdraw in confusion. After its peak in the 14th century, Majapahit power began to decline and was unable to control the rising power of Malacca Sultanate. Dates for the end of the Majapahit kingdom range from 1478 to 1520. A large number of courtiers, artisans, priests, and members of the royal family moved east to the island of Bali at the end of Majapahit power. Islamic era. Although Muslim traders first traveled through Southeast Asia early in the Islamic era, the earliest evidence of Islamized populations in Indonesia dates to the 13th century in northern Sumatra. The first evidence of Indonesian Muslims comes from Marco Polo, on his way home from China in 1292. Reported at least one Muslim town, and the first evidence of a Muslim dynasty is the gravestone, dated R696, of Sultan Malik al-Saleh, the first Muslim ruler of Samudera Pasai Sultanate, with further gravestones indicating continued Islamic rule. In the first 15th century, Paramaswara, a descendant of Prince from Palembang, was founded the Sultanate of Malacca. As a bustling international trading port, Malacca emerged as a center for Islamic learning and dissemination, and encouraged the development of the Malay language, literature and arts. By the end of the 16th century, other Indonesian areas gradually adopted Islam, and it was the dominant religion in Java and Sumatra. The spread of Islam was accompanied by the rise of sultanates in various locations. These were the Sultanate of Ternate in the east to the Sultanate of Aceh to the west, as well as many more sultanates in between them. Sultanate of Aceh was founded in the early 16th century and would later become the most powerful North Sumatran state and one of the most powerful in the whole western part of Malay archipelago. Demak Sultanate played an important role in the establishment of Islam on Java and neighboring area. Demak was the main exporter of rice to Malacca, and with the rise of Malacca, so did Demak rise into prominence. For the most part, Islam overlaid and mixed with existing cultural and religious influences, which shaped the predominant form of Islam in Indonesia, particularly in Java. The first regular contact between Europeans and the peoples of Indonesia began in 1512, when Portuguese traders, led by Francisco Serrao, sought to monopolize the sources of nutmeg, cloves, and cubeb pepper in Maluku. After the arrival of the Portuguese colonials and the tensions that followed regarding control of the spice trade, the Acehnese Sultan Alaeddin al-Qahar sent an embassy to the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent in 1564, requesting Ottoman support against the Portuguese Empire. The Ottomans then dispatched their admiral Kurtoglu Hizir Reis. He set sail with a force of 22 ships carrying soldiers, military equipment and other supplies. According to accounts written by the Portuguese Admiral Fernão Mendes Pinto, the Ottoman fleet that first arrived in Aceh consisted of a few Turks and largely of Muslims from the ports of the Indian Ocean. Dutch and British traders followed. In 1602, the Dutch established the Dutch East India Company and became the dominant European power. European colonization. Following bankruptcy, the VOC was formally dissolved in 1800, and the government of the Netherlands established the Dutch East Indies as a nationalized colony. After the fall of the Netherlands to the First French Empire and the dissolution of the Dutch East India Company in 1800, there were profound changes in the European colonial administration of the East Indies. In 1806, King Lodewijk of the Netherlands sent one of his generals, Herman Willem Daendels, to serve as Governor-General of the East Indies. Based in Java, Daendels was sent to strengthen Javanese defences against a predicted British invasion, and he was responsible for the construction of the Great Post Road across northern Java from Anjar to Panarukan. In 1811, Java fell to a British East India Company force under Baron Minto, the Governor-General of India. Lord Minto appointed Sir Thomas Stamford Raffles as Lieutenant Governor of Java. Raffles launched some military expeditions against local princes to subjugate them into British rule, such as the assault on Yogyakarta Kraton in 21 June 1812, and the military expedition against Sultan Mahmud Badruddin II of Palembang, and seized the nearby Bangka Island. In 1815, the island of Java was returned to control of the Netherlands following the end of Napoleonic Wars, under the terms of the Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1814. In the 1820s, the Dutch had yet to consolidate their possessions in some parts of the Dutch East Indies after reacquiring it from the British. This was especially true on the island of Sumatra, where some areas would not come under Dutch rule until the 20th century. In 1821, the Dutch were involved in the Padri War of West Sumatra. A Javanese uprising was crushed in the Java War of 1825 to 1830. After 1830, a system of forced cultivations and indentured labor was introduced on Java, the cultivation system. In 1870s, the Dutch attacked Aceh Sultanate and started the Aceh War. The Dutch intervention in Aceh cost the lives of thousands of troops and was a severe drain on the colonial government's financial expenditure. In 1901, the Dutch adopted what they called the ethical policy, which included somewhat increased investment in indigenous education and modest political reforms. It was only in the early 20th century, 3 centuries after the first Dutch trading post, that the full extent of the colonial territory was established and direct colonial rule exerted across what would become the boundaries of the modern Indonesian state. Indonesian nationalism and movements supporting independence from Dutch colonialism, such as Budi Utomo, the Indonesian National Party, Sarekat Islam, and the Indonesian Communist Party, grew rapidly in the first half of the 20th century. The most notable of these leaders were Sukarno, Muhammad Hatta, Sultan Syahrir, and Tan Malaka, who had benefited from the educational reforms of the ethical policy. In 1926 to 1927, there was a PKI-led revolt against the Dutch colonialism and the harsh repression based on strikes of urban workers. However, the strikes and the revolt was put down by the Dutch, with some 13,000 nationalists and communists leaders arrested. Some 4,500 were given prison sentences, 1,308 interned, and 823 exiled to Diggle, West New Guinea. World War II and post-independence. For most of the colonial period, Dutch control over the archipelago was tenuous outside of coastal strongholds. Only in the early 20th century did Dutch dominance extend to what was to become Indonesia's present boundaries. Japanese occupation during World War II ended Dutch rule and encouraged the previously suppressed Indonesian independence movement. A later UN report stated that 4 million people died in Indonesia as a result of the Japanese occupation. 2 days after the surrender of Japan in August 1945, Sukarno-Hatta, two influential nationalist leader, declared independence and were appointed president and vice president. On 14 November 1945, Sukarno appointed Sultan Syahrir as first prime minister, a European-educated politician who was never involved with the Japanese occupation authorities. The Netherlands tried to re-establish their rule, and the resulting conflict ended in December 1949, when, in the face of international pressure, the Dutch formally recognized Indonesian independence with the exception of the Dutch territory of West New Guinea, which was incorporated into Indonesia following the 1962 New York Agreement. and the UN-mandated Act of Free Choice of 1969, which was questionable and has resulted in a long-time independence movement. New Order and Reformasi Sukarno moved Indonesia from democracy towards authoritarianism, and maintained his power base by balancing the opposing forces of the military and the PKI. An attempted coup on 30 September 1965 was countered by the army, who led a violent anti-communist purge, during which the PKI was blamed for the coup and effectively destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people are estimated to have been killed. The head of the military, General Suharto, outmaneuvered the politically weakened Sukarno and was formally appointed president in March 1968. His New Order administration was supported by the U.S. government, and encouraged foreign direct investment in Indonesia, which was a major factor in the subsequent 3 decades of substantial economic growth. However, the authoritarian New Order was widely accused of corruption and suppression of political opposition. Indonesia was the country hardest hit by the late 1990s Asian financial crisis. This led to popular protest against the New Order, which led to Suharto's resignation in May 1998. In 1999, East Timor voted to secede from Indonesia, after a 25-year military occupation that was marked by international condemnation of repression of the East Timorese. Since Suharto's resignation, a strengthening of democratic processes has included a regional autonomy program, and the first direct presidential election in 2004, which was won by Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, who went on to win a second term in 2009. Political and economic instability, social unrest, corruption, and terrorism slowed progress. However, in the last 5 years the economy has performed strongly. Although relations among different religious and ethnic groups are largely harmonious, sectarian discontent and violence have persisted. A political settlement to an armed separatist conflict in ACEH was achieved in 2005. Joko Widodo was elected as president in the 2014 presidential election.